Hi, I'm Keegan, and this is a Bunch of Gamers. Welcome back to GM Talks. My goodness, 3 episodes in 1 month. And I am joined by Eddy Webb, creator of Pugmire, writer from the old Vampire the Masquerade days, and several other games from the Onyx Path Publishing. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's always good to hang out and talk about GM stuff, I guess. I don't know what the category for what we talk about. We talk about a lot of different stuff on this show.
We sure do. So, as we all know, Pugmire is infamously apolitical. So, if you were to create Pugmire again, how would you inject your political themes into it?
Right. Okay. So, let me start by talking about Alan Moore, which is a natural connection to Pugmire. There's a fantastic website called BBC Maestro, and basically what they do is they get people who are famous and also really good at their jobs to do basically a video course. They record the video course, very professionally done. They give you course notes, and you pay either one time to get access to a specific course or a subscription to get access to all the courses for a year. Alan Moore has done one on storytelling. And like the first thing he says, like first thing you do as a writer is find a moral and political stance and embrace it. And I completely agree with that. I mean, I understand to a degree why the conversation has drifted this way, but all art is political, right? Even the act of claiming it is apolitical is itself a political act. So you can't say that you have a piece of art that is completely without political context, because all art is taken in context. There is a reason why things that were perfectly fine are popularly in the 80s, we watch now and go, oh, maybe that wasn't so great, because the political climate around that art has changed, and therefore the arts, gets recontextualized as a result of that. So to say that art is apolitical is just a nonsense stance, to be honest. So all that said, Pugmire absolutely does have my politics in it. The big thing is I don't make a big deal about it. I just do it, I think it's a big part of it. It is just, I know what my beliefs are, my ideology is, and I want the game to appeal to people who, that I would like to game with. So I make sure that the game is welcoming and inclusive of those kinds of people. That is a political stance. It is not an aggressive one, but certainly it is a political stance.
Sure. And I had a conversation with someone else online, actually, and we were talking about, like, part of being human is liking problematic art to some degree, but being aware of what's problematic about it and maybe, actually thinking about it. And there's a weird thing, especially in nerd spaces, where people try and defang their favorite art by trying to make it as, like, benign and apolitical as possible. And that happened on the last politics talk. Someone tried to comment on that and saying injecting politics where none are, but that's a whole different story. It's just what sparked the conversation. Is like, I like dungeon crawls. I think dungeon crawls are very fun. However, dungeon crawls are very much rooted in the idea of colonialism and going in and
it's very robbing for profit. Absolutely,
exactly. But it is interesting because with Pugmire, it becomes slightly different, and you can do a twist on it while it still kind of goes to some of those roots. Doing a dungeon crawl in Pugmire is an extinct species. It'd be like if we found a temple of dinosaurs that actually had like a religion, and we went through what do the ethics of that change. And it's a really interesting political and like historical question to me.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I wanted to dig into a little bit, in the sense that because the people in Pugmire frame humanity as gods, and certainly some people in the world don't believe that. But the idea is that this is from a colonial standpoint, as it were, this is an empire that ruled the entire world. So it's not one empire opposing another empire. It's this empire of humanity controlled the entire world that is now gone. And so we're trying to recover what was lost before. Absolutely, that does kind of recontextualize it, because you're not going to another culture and taking what's theirs. It is everyone's culture, and you're trying to reacquire it. Now, what happens when that stuff gets pulled out of the ground, as it were, and then just some people want to use it for themselves, some people want to give it to the whole of dogs and cats, people want to use it in their political machinations, destroy it even, and that's where the context, as it were, of everything kind of comes in, where characters start moving around. But that's just a different way of looking at kind of the politics of things. What do you do with these weapons, this knowledge, once you acquire it?
No, that makes sense, and it's very reminiscent of, to me, like the medieval to Renaissance period, which I think also Dungeons and Dragons pulls from, in that essentially, you know, to them, Europe was the world, and this world-spanning empire vanished, and so raiding it for essentially, you know, things to try and recapture what that empire was. I think that kind of permeates a lot of European and American, certainly, literary and gaming traditions.
Right, exactly. And, you know, there's also things like the fact that Pugmire calls itself an empire. It's an empire of two cities, but it's an empire. And that's pointing towards a very specific storyline of dogs are going to ultimately repeat the mistakes of the past. They're going to continue to do the same mistakes that we are going through right now. But one of the things that I tried to do with Pugmire specifically is that I wanted to make all of these kinds of discussions, all this kind of debate, opt-in. I never want to tell people this silly dog game must be played a certain way because it aligns with my personal beliefs. But I want people to discover it and go, oh, I can do it this way. Perfect example is when I was playtesting Pugmire back in 2015. Ran a game for 6 people at a convention. They had no idea what the game was. Just like, it's a silly dog game. It's kind of like D&D. Come and play. And the entire story was that one of the characters had a friend who was a cat. The cat and the dog both got found desecrating an ancient book, and only the cat was arrested and subject to questioning while the dog was pretty much let go. And so the cat asked favors, you know, one phone call to the player characters get involved, start investigating. And it becomes a pretty straightforward dungeon crawl, find evidence that this cat was not actually the person who did this grave robbing, bring back some evidence of that, as well as, you know, investigating a small dungeon, and then cat gets let off scot-free. Afterwards, tidying up all the players, you know, thank me for time, they drift off, one player stays behind, it goes, can I ask a question? I'm like, sure, go ahead. And it's like, was this a game about racial profiling? And it's like, yes, but I didn't call it that. I didn't say, by the way, wink, wink, this is a game about how brown and black people get abused by the politicals or the police system.
Sure.
I just wanted to say, of course, dogs hate cats, and we all know that culturally. So people go, okay, I get why that's happening. But if you want to dig in and go, well, why do they hate cats? That's there, and you can have that conversation. You can play with that if you want to. So it's available. You can opt into that conversation. But if you don't, okay, well, the dog has arrested a cat and treated the cat badly because dogs don't like cats. Okay, and we can just move on and not think anymore about that.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I, as you can probably see in the chat, I sent Amelin my my one published Canis Minor book, which is maybe a bit more on the nose. I think I told you the one review that was like, there's always been a question that's plagued Pugmire. Is this a funny game? And is it for kids? With this book, it can be neither. It's like, wow, okay, woo. Thank you.
Nice.
Right.
But that's true, though, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because one of the things that a lot of people, it's weird, there's not a lot of conversation around this about Pugmire specifically, but I am very much drawing from a very old tradition of using quote-unquote funny animals as a way to satirize the world around me. Very famously, Carl Barks did this with the Donald Ducks and Scrooge McDuck comics, you know, which the basis of those became DuckTales. You know, a lot of the older Warner Brothers cartoons, not that you can watch them now because they're all taken down by Warner Brothers, so thank you very much for that. But if you find the Looney Tunes cartoons, a lot of them are deeply satirical, sometimes in ways that are not aged well. Certainly some of the World War II cartoons are really rough. But, you know, there's a lot of subtle and very obvious political satire that comes from that. There's a lot of newspaper strips that in some form where about a small animal making fun or observing things. Doonesbury, another great example of that. So this is a long tradition of using animals as a way to talk about people. So I was very intentionally building the world out to make sure that people who wanted to engage in that long tradition of satirical, funny animals, they can. But if what people remember from Looney Tunes is Donald and Daffy just blowing the crap out of each other, that's fine. You can do that too. If you want to just play a Weimaraner with a two-handed sword, you can do that. It's still there. But I wanted to make sure this tradition was kept. So it's not new to Pugmire. It certainly comes from a long history.
Oh, for sure. And I think also, if you think about it, it's like it works for kids. Kids get used to it, and then when they come back, it's a oh sort of thing. And it
right.
This is kind of a thing I've been toying with more recently, and it's kind of the inspiration of this particular series. Is I don't think art necessarily changes people's opinions. I think it does maybe spark imagination for what could be possible and things like that. But I am curious if tabletop is in a strangely unique position simply because people tend to be both the consumer of the art and the producer of the art at their tables, and if that is a way to prime people towards political action, political thought, things like that. Just observing from my own werewolf game, several of the people have become more, I guess you'd call it, radicalized into more anti-capitalist views as the game has progressed. And part of that is probably the real world. Certainly, I can't claim maybe any credit, but it does seem like an interesting thing where they start to engage with those things specifically, explore those things specifically, and it creates a feedback loop.
No, absolutely. And I mean, let's be honest, Werewolf the Apocalypse from day one was about a game about being really pissed off at oil companies and wanting to tear shit down. I mean, so the fact that concept has aged extremely well since the 90s is both terrifying but also really helpful for Werewolf the Apocalypse. Although, I do have to say, I do remember very vividly, it was on before I left X, Twitter, I did post something about politics and World Darkness, and someone came along and was like, I thought Werewolf the Apocalypse was great until you injected anti-capitalist propaganda into it. And it's like, wait, of all of the games that you would claim that we injected politics into, Werewolf the Apocalypse, where literally the game starts with your Mother Earth is dying, is the one that you're going, that never had politics before. What the hell?
I almost tagged you on Blue Sky with a meme I created several years ago, because we talked about this at Gen Con once, that someone had said to you, and I created the meme where it's like the bird going, it's a nice day out. I really liked Werewolf the Apocalypse until you put environmental stuff in it. What? Yeah, why can't it just be what? So, but no, it's very silly, and it's interesting how people. So that's why I think that's where I come to the conclusion that art doesn't necessarily being consumed and maybe even played with change people's opinions, because the OSR I've observed this in, but I've also observed it in Werewolf the Apocalypse, where a lot of people actually engage with the anti-capitalist roots, things like that, and go forth. And then there's a not insignificant part of that fan base, even before the new edition, that were like hyper conservative in place, like weirdly hyper conservative.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And like basically just ignored the thing where Pentex was like, they're like, Pentex is too cartoonishly evil, and it's like, the more you learn, really. the less that feels true. Yeah, the less that feels true. But no, I've noticed that, and it's kind of an interesting kind of dichotomy. It's like, it's actually interesting because they're so close to each other, because OSR is very much, its origins are rooted in Gygax's original, like, right-wing, kind of like Jehovah's Witness, kind of sword and sorcery, colonization, like, stories. But a large chunk of that fan base has broken off and become more leftist, more liberal, and, like, have changed it within their own games,
Right.
even though that's kind of an underlying thing. And with Werewolf the Apocalypse, it starts from a very anti-capitalist lefty view, and then the chunk has broken off to become more right-wing. And it's just kind of an interesting sort of like thing that people are doing with those games specifically.
Yeah, and I mean, so if I could take a step back, I would argue that art absolutely does have the ability to change people's minds. I would also argue that modern day, how we have trained people to engage with art in the modern day, does art no favors on that front. Because there's so much content, and the fact that we call it content now, means that I don't have to engage critically with anything. So I can just look at something, take whatever message I want to, and step away, and then not engage further, and just assume that is actually what's going on. But there are lots of media where it's almost a litmus test of what your politics are by what you get out of it. And the example I love to give is Star Trek. Star Trek attracts both very liberal science fiction fans and very conservative science fiction fans. And the reality is Star Trek has both ideologies at a fundamental level. I mean, yes, it has a lot of utopian liberal ideas like, we get rid of money, it's anti-capitalism, and, what about embracing diversity? I mean, a lot of the DEI initiatives that people are rolling back now ultimately comes from the Vulcan thing of infinite diversity, infinite combinations. So Star Trek is very leftist in that front, but also it is explicitly and extremely colonial. That we, the humans, will go to these alien worlds and tell them what's good for them, including not interfering with horrible things happening to them because we know better that we shouldn't interfere. So you can have people on both sides go to Star Trek, love Star Trek, and then point to the other side and say, you don't get Star Trek like I do. You're getting it wrong. When the reality is, no, it's a complicated property morally. So role-playing games are kind of the same way, is the sense that because you have creative input, you are both artist and purveyor of arts, you feel an emotional connection to it. And certainly people who invest a lot into it start to feel like they have ownership over it to a degree, and that therefore their way of doing it is correct. But I do know, like, particularly in the world of darkness, I've known lots of people who have come up to me at conventions or I've gamed with who have said things like, playing the world of darkness allowed me to explore parts of myself that I was uncomfortable with and come to embrace them. Quite a few trans people would just play a different gender in the world of darkness, the one that they're more aligned with, and realized, oh, this is actually who I feel like I need to be, who I really am, because I got a chance to explore that in a tabletop role-playing game in a way that wasn't judged, because we as gamers are very used to, the gender identity you're identifying as is different from the one I believe I'm seeing in front of me, because that's how tabletop role-playing games work on a basic level. So people have changed their minds, and one person, she is sadly no longer with us, but Gino Jakeway started off as extremely conservative, aggressively so, and then realized who she really was and very much changed. And a lot of that was, in her case, working in video games and getting exposure to it. But also she worked very heavily with tabletop gamers. She was a prolific artist in the 80s and 70s. And so when she gained more exposure and connection to people that she disagreed with, but she started gaming with them, started playing with them, started learning about them, realizing, oh, actually, maybe I do agree with you more than I thought. It is certainly possible. But again, the hyper fast pace of how we do things, like hell, even tabletop role-playing games now have become content, a thing to be consumed because of actual plays. Actual plays are great. There's lots of great ones out there, and there's a great way to give people access to seeing games they wouldn't have played before, styles of play they hadn't played before. I'm not dismissing the concept of actual plays. I think they're fantastic. But it does mean that there are people who identify as role-playing game fans who have never actually played a role-playing game, because they can just consume it without actually participating in it.
I think that's partially true. I also think I think the environment we exist in, where art is art, then the media that you consume is now considered a essentially like part of your morality. right? It's
Yes.
a moral
Okay.
choice what art you like. Now, I would say
Yeah.
there might be a moral choice on the art you support financially, whether you like it or not. Like, I would say supporting Orson Scott Card or J.K. Rowling at this
J.K.
point
Rowling. Yep.
is irresponsible, because she has said, I make so much money, so clearly I'm right. And if you have your books, I'm not saying don't read your old Harry Potter books. If you love Harry Potter because of what it gave you, that's totally fine. And you can pull definitely ideas that contradict what J.K. Rowling says, because people are complicated. But there's a certain, it's the spending thing. But I agree, it's the moral thing of like, because I liked Attack on Titan for the most part, and it does have a lot of very strong anti-war themes, but it also has a lot of kind of pro-fascist themes, like a lot. Like, the fact that no one can tell you whether it's pro-fascist or anti-fascist is probably
Good sign. Yeah.
not a great sign, right? Or I like I know I like some problematic art. I like Cocaine Owlbear, even though it very much unintentionally like basically promotes the drug war and that environmentalists are a bunch of snooty weirdos. It just promotes them,
Right.
but it's also stupidly fun. Cocaine Bear is just great. Cocaine Owlbear is the game.
I mean,
Sorry.
No, honestly, I want to play Cocaine Owlbear. That sounds fantastic.
It is a great game. Highly recommend.
But like, I'm a 50-year-old punk, right? So I mean,
Sure.
I grew up with embracing very angry media, but I also grew up with very complicated relationships with media and games and whatnot. To kind of your point, like I deeply love traditional superheroes. I'm a huge Marvel fan. I'm becoming a huge DC fan. Just watching Batman Beyond. I mean, I own the DVDs of Batman Beyond. That's how I have a fandom. I have the Ghost Rider 2099 comic anthology. So I really love this stuff. But I also recognize that superheroes, as traditionally presented, are largely a fascist metaphor. This one person will make everything all right, and we just need to follow them. And I'm very much against that. So I have always felt that as long as you are aware, as long as you engage with arts mindfully, it is perfectly fine to have problematic faves. That's something that I've personally been trying to advocate more. It's like, have a problematic fave. We all do. Just accept it. Just embrace it. It's like, hey, this thing, I know this artist is bad. I know H.P. Lovecraft is a horrible, unrepentant racist. I get that J.K. Rowling is just an awful human being. But don't. If the art means something to you, it means something to you. A perfect example of this is one of my favorite podcasts is Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men. And Jay is a trans man. In fact, transitioned over the course of the podcast, actually. So like it was very fascinating just because it's a podcast around for 10 years. They put out an episode nearly every week. So like you can see someone, hear their voice change. You can hear how they approach things. Like the hosts were married initially, now they're divorced in two completely different marriages they're both happy with. It's a fantastic, interesting thing. But at one point, Jay talked about this on some level, and obviously being a trans man, has strong opinions, leftist opinions, but also is still a very big fan of Orson Scott Card's art, to the point where not only does Jay have signed copies of Card's books, but also had a letter, exchanged letters with Orson Scott Card for a while. And Jay's been very open. It's like, I'm not getting rid of that. I'm not going to destroy that because of Orson's opinions. I obviously very strongly disagree with them. I don't think we're going to ever be friends again. I certainly don't want to email him unless it's to tell him to fuck off. But what he did for me at a formative part of my life, I can't undo. I can't change that. It has shaped who I am now. And to reject that, to say that is no longer a part of me, would be disingenuous. And so I've never been a huge Harry Potter fan, even before any of this stuff about Rowling came out. But my family love Harry Potter. They now do. We live in London, so it's really hard to escape it, and we don't want to financially support Rowling anymore. But also, we do own the movies. We own some of the books. we don't, why get rid of those? Because they bring joy to my family, and I don't want to take that away from them. So art should be challenging. Art should be complicated. It should be messy, honestly, because real life is all of those things. Real life is complicated and challenging and messy. Real life does not fall into very convenient ideological blocks that you can consume. I would even also argue to a certain amount that while consuming art that is comfortable is certainly good for mental health, if that's all you do, if you only consume art that aligns with your ideology, you don't really grow as a person. You don't have to embrace it. In fact, I highly encourage you don't. But at the same time, for an hour to watch a movie that you wouldn't normally watch and become a little uncomfortable and go, okay, why did I feel that way? Why am I this way? Can be really helpful. And also, even frankly, art that does align with your ideology, maybe you don't go harder. My friend Chris Spivey, who, for purposes of conversation, is a Black American, I very good friend of mine, love him to death. He has been getting me to watch more Black media and read more Black media. And I was like, of course, I consider myself to be, not racist, and I grew up around Black and Latinx kids when I was younger. So I was like, oh yeah, this is great. And I was like, oh, I still have a lot to learn. And by consuming this media, and I'm talking like, everything from Sidney Poitier in the 60s to, Get Out a few years ago. I mean, The Gambit. I've not only learned a lot more, and I feel like I've grown as a person because I've seen some, I would say, oh, this is like this. And Chris go, no, here's a whole thing that you're missing. It's like, okay. But also I've discovered some really fantastic media. Like as a result of that, I found the novels of Chester Himes, who is a fantastic noir writer, criminally underrated. But he wrote some fantastic noir in the 20s and 30s, the Harlem Detective series. And it is brutal. It is great. And also the Himes novels, a perfect example, is that he does not present the Black experience as a monolith. The Black characters are all of this. Some of them have very, very disgusting opinions. But he's like, that's because the Black experience is complicated and nuanced. There are some media I will never consume. I'm not going to watch Mein Kampf or read Mein Kampf, I should say. There's some things I'm not going to get benefit out of it. But certainly things that I've watched and gone, oh, I didn't expect that. I don't know how I feel about that. But I'm glad I watched it because I can think about how it impacts me and do it. I've gamed with people that I don't align with politically, but interesting things come out of those, and I feel like I've learned more about myself as a person as a result of being in those experiences. So not only do I push back on the all art is injecting politics into art and all art is political, and I stand by that, but also the idea that art and politics need to be completely aligned, I also push back against. So yes, maybe your favorite game does have a lot of queer people in it, and you'd rather not see queer people in it. Maybe it did inject our politics into a game that you liked, and you don't like this politics anymore. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe you should engage with that, or just say, okay, I'm gonna still play this game, but I'm not going to engage with it anymore. But the problem really is, I know I'm all over the place, I'm sorry, but again, that Chris Spivey, first of all, fantastic writer, has done a lot of stuff, but he's primarily known for
Harlem Unbound. Yep,
fantastic book. I will take a brief digression and say he's also worked on things like the Dune RPG and Cyberpunk Red and other stuff that he does not get talked about nearly much. He does fantastic work on Chicago by Night. So he's done a lot of stuff. It's not just Harlem Unbound, but that is kind of in some ways his magnum opus, right? And Harlem Unbound is extremely clear about its politics. It starts off with every character in this book is Black unless said otherwise. It's 100% a very specific point. It is very much an attempt to reclaim the mythos from a racist standpoint and center it again. And to give people a chance to really dig into the Black experience. And consistently what has happened is people have gone, I don't know if I'm allowed to play a Black character. I don't know if it's okay for me to do this, so I won't. So there's a clear opportunity to learn something that people are just assuming it's not for them because of this mindset that ideology and identity must align with your art preferences. So again, I acknowledge it myself. Am I allowed to enjoy media that is pitched for Black people, and resoundingly what I've heard is like, fuck yes, please do more of that. Right? A lot of my friends are like going, please consume more of this so you can understand us better. But there is still that kind of thing, like, this isn't for me, so I opt out of it when maybe you should be engaging with it more.
Yeah, I need to get back into my my James Baldwin rabbit hole that I started a couple years ago, because he is a fantastic writer. I got through a book of his essays, but I have Giovanni's letter on my Kindle that I need to read through. And I've read through Harlem Unbound. I will run a game of Harlem Unbound because the game asked me explicitly to do that. And I just won't record it. That will not be a bunch of gamers actual play. That is not my story.
No, that is something that people should have the space to comfortably explore and make mistakes. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly. Excuse me. Like, my werewolf game is full of several missteps, and I'll hold my hand up to that. I use the old tribal names for the two brothers, and that people might notice that I switched those terms mid-game. Little things like that, using the term metis, and now I've switched to the Crinosporn. Totems switched to patron, things like that. Those are all mistakes I've made. I wouldn't call it very publicly, like maybe 100 people, but it's
still. But that's another point, right? Is like having room to make those mistakes, having rooms to quote unquote consume art incorrectly should be part of the process, right?
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. And no, it's just I agree. It's just it's an interesting thing, and I do like some of the disclaimers in those books. Like I like Coyote and Crow's disclaimer at the start, going, for Indigenous people reading this book, please use any of your tribal stuff that you know of to deepen and enrich this experience. For non-Indigenous people, don't fucking do that.
Do not.
Which was great. Like it's very blunt. I think that bluntness is very, very appropriate, very necessary. I know Thirsty Sword Lesbians has similar kind of writing style. I will not run Thirsty Sword Lesbians, though, simply because I just don't like Powered by the Apocalypse all that much.
Right.
Right. Man, this is such a great setting. Shame. That's so...
Totally.
One of those feelings. But no, it is interesting, and I do find it interesting, like with Goodman Games, who aren't necessarily a bastion of progressivism. They try and keep a relatively low profile from what I've seen, but they also do things that are very clear in some political alignment. Like one of the mainline art characters is black. They changed their disclaimer at the front of I think their 8th or 9th printing of the Dungeon Crawl Classics core book, that changed from like, hey, you will respect Arneson, Gygax, the writers in Appendix N, etc., etc., and it went to, you will respect these original creators of D&D, and remember that fantasy is diverse, and you should pull from multiple pools to craft a story that includes everyone. And I'm like, oh, that's a nice little change to that like opening ethos, right?
Right.
And some people who are, normal's kind of a derogatory term, so I won't use that one. So people who have a little bit of sense went, oh, very nice. That's
right.
I get that. And then an insignificant number of people lost their fucking mind, and it's just like they hate Gary, and it's just like, oh man.
Did you see the part where respect? But I mean, but again, it's there's this idea that respect needs to be unilateral.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that. My example I often go to is Sherlock Holmes, because anybody who's known me for more than a day realizes I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, aside from everything else I do. And so I have nothing but respect for the original canon, and I actually have a large amount of respect for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was, for his time, extremely progressive, and I can go into that at some point, but I won't to. The point of this analogy is that his estate can die in a fire. They are nothing more than basically the literary equivalent of patent trolls. They're horrible, and I will frequently go out of my way to go tell the estate to fuck itself. So I respect the writer, I respect the material. I don't doesn't even have to respect absolutely everything associated with his legacy. And I've seen people say it's like going, well, if you disrespect the estate, obviously you disrespect Sir Arthur. It's like Sir Arthur's dead. He doesn't give a hell what my opinion is.
Right.
Same with Lovecraft. It's like Lovecraft not looking me up to go, hey, I saw you said bad things about me on Twitter. He's gone. So
also,
it's really
he'd be
easy
too
to
nervous to at you on Twitter. If we're being honest, the
Right.
historical, you just seethe, and then write a very passive
Ernest
aggressive
Hemingway.
like.
Yeah, it's like I heard that maybe you were displeased with me. No, I told you you're fucking racist, dude. But my point is like, there can be complexity there. There are certainly games who I disagree with some piece of it, and I just don't engage with that piece of it. But and this is the part that baffles me. Like, this is not new. This has basically been day one. You know, from 1975, when after 1974 the first rules came out, and someone said, "Yeah, I'm gonna do something different," and then started publishing their own knockoff versions of D&D. Everyone's been rehacking and modifying things at their table. There's obviously a load of real world difference, but there's no fundamental difference but just saying, hey, orcs are not explicitly evil race, and saying, hey, I don't use descending Thaco. I don't use descending DC. I use ascending armor class instead. You're just changing the game to suit what your table wants to engage with. So if you really want to play World of the Apocalypse as a metaphor for basically a military unit that destroys the government that's trying to oppress you and take your weaponry away in order to heighten your particular enjoyment of World of the Apocalypse, you can. It is there on the page in some ways. It does require ignoring a large chunk of the setting, but you can do that. We all do that. And that's fine. Being mad at World of the Apocalypse for being World of the Apocalypse is just dumb. Because it is what it is. That would be like going to Eclipse Phase and going, man, this game would be great if you weren't anarchists. It's baked into the game, right? It is a game about space anarchists doing heists. If you don't like space anarchists doing heists, that's okay. And if you want to use Eclipse Phase to something else, that's also okay. But you can't be mad at the game for being what it is. So I can engage with art, and both art I love and I hate, in very different ways and very complicated ways. I can still respect that it is what it is. I respect the hell out of Ernest Hemingway's writing style. Ernest Hemingway did a lot to move the needle forward in how literature is perceived and changed. He helps to move it from being a walled garden to something that anyone felt like they could possibly do. Ernest Hemingway is a drunk dude, bro, and a lot of his stories are fucking terrible. But I respect him for what he did. I respect him for some of the things that he put out. I respect the Gygax family for having a piece of creating this art form that I now both love and also am professionally employed by. And that will never stop. But it doesn't change the fact that there's a lot of problems there. And like you said, they're baked into D&D, which means on some level they're baked into our hobby. This whole concept of if your politics don't align with your art, you're bad at your politics is frustrating, because how do we get people to do more art that does align with your politics if we don't get messy about this? This goes back to Pugmire. I knew there were going to be a lot of people who don't want to dig into the sexual politics of dog people, right? There are some people who do, and furries are wonderful. There have been great supporter of Pugmire for years. I wish them well in their future lives. And I even chat with them, hang out with them. They're wonderful people. It's not something I want to dig into particularly either. But, I felt it was important to have a little sidebar in character talking about, hey, it seems like the ancient days of man, there was some confusion about what people identified as or who could love who, and that seems silly. I don't think man would ever do that because we love man. Obviously, man would tell us that everyone can love everybody. So if you see these contradictory things, just ignore them. And yet, one person on TV Tropes had to, on the Pugmire page, point out that being dictated to by a small pug about gender politics is stupid. Someone felt the need to go to TV Tropes and express that opinion about a pug princess saying, "Hey, maybe loving people is okay." So I'm guessing that person's not bought the game or is no longer a fan. Okay, but that's fine. But
Poor
you can also
Yoshida
just
Pug
ignore that
is
sidebar.
Yeah, right. Poor Yoshida Pug, just constantly committing that sin of empathy.
Right, I know. She's clearly the young, passionate princess who just wants everyone to get along, saying, "Hey, maybe we should get along," is clearly injecting my politics in the game. And the answer is yes, but to eventually get to the original question, I think the word injecting is the word that does a lot of heavy lifting in this discussion overall, right? Because everything I've just set aside, there are absolutely games that Harlem Unbound is a certain example. There are games even go further than that, that are very explicit. Here is the audience we're going for. There are some intensely queer games out there. There are intensely conservative tabletop role-playing games out there too. Let's be clear. I mean, it happens on both sides. And if they have the courage to basically say, "Listen, this game's not for you. This game's for this section of the audience," great, right? That is not injecting politics into a game. That is creating a game based on a very specific ideological mold and telling people, if you're not into this, you're not going to have fun. So try to warn you ahead of time because it's maybe not for you. Injecting specifically is taking something that had a clear political stance, even if that political stance is apolitical, and then forcing a different political stance into the experience in a way that is unremovable. That is certainly things that have happened. And it happens in all sorts of media. It has happened in tabletop role-playing games. Hell, I think I probably have even done it myself. I certainly have pushed the needle on saying, Vampire going, "Hey, let's maybe not have all brown people assassins. That we're going a different direction with that. Just so you know." So I've certainly done that. It does happen. I think it happens way less than online discourse implies. I would struggle to come up with 10 examples off the top of my head right now, right? I think it's very infrequent. I think most of the times it is simply reframing the existing political viewpoints or adapting it for modern consumption. That is not injecting politics. That is modernizing a game to refine it better to what it needs to be. And B, if that happens, capitalism has given us a very clear path on how to protest products that no longer enjoyable for us, which is to stop buying them. So when people burn their stuff in protest because of something that happens, I think it's a bit funny. I think it's a bit silly, but it is a valid way to express your current. Now, people who intentionally go out to buy things that they're angry about for the purposes of burning them, these people are just dumb. You have now done nothing to encourage the artists because you've given them more money. So I don't understand that.
Right. From Cyborg, I just dropped in the chat there, rule 0 of that injecting into politics is rule 0. Player characters cannot be loyal or have sympathies to any corpse, the cops, or the capitalist system. They might find themselves reluctantly forced to do missions for them, but overall they are your enemy. And it's like, break every rule but this one. It's like, dang. And I don't. Have you ever seen the guy who wrote Morkborg and Cyborg? That dude.
No, but I do own Cyborg. Yeah.
Yeah, he is the archetypical punk. He's got like the spike jacket.
Nice.
Mohawk, etc. It's fucking great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and actually, I'm glad you mentioned Cyborg. Cyborg's another great example. I'm a huge cyberpunk fan. When a lot of right before World of Darkness became my obsession, Cyberpunk 2020 was my obsession. And there was certainly a lot of overlap between those two. And so a lot of how I view game design, to be blunt, came from Mike Pondsmith. And so, when you have a black liberal man who's, basically got an indie press to show his view of the world, that's going to skew you a certain direction, right? So, like, I understand where my antecedents come from. But at the same time, Cyberpunk's now a multi-million-dollar property. There's certain things it can't do anymore. Whereas something small and scrappy like Cyborg can put a rule like that. It's like going, you just can't do this. And of course, obviously, you can go, well, I'm just ignoring that. Yeah, for my Cyborg game, people can do this. I mean, so it's just a statement of intent. Hey, this game is all about tearing down a man. It's about tearing down capitalism. You are a punk. And in Cyborg's defense, you are a punk in both senses of the word, both political and also as a kind of minor irritant that's going to get stepped on. So, I mean, it does embrace both sides of that. Whereas Cyberpunk Reds has to show a slightly more nuanced perspective. It's still aggressively anti-capitalist. It's still aggressively anti-corporate. But also it shows that, hey, the world's pretty complicated. So your best bet is just take care of your people, keep your gun loaded, and do what you got to do.
Well, and that's actually a more interesting topic, I think, is, excuse me, capitalism tends to absorb everything, including critiques of itself, to be repackaged as something to be consumed in general. Mm-hmm. And so just being in the creative space, things like that, how much of that do you think affects any sort of like anti-capitalist intent in art you produce, or for companies in general in the space, do you think, as someone who regularly writes in the tabletop space?
To be honest, I see this much more on licensed products than I do necessarily. And even then, I almost never have a client say, "Hey, you can't talk about these topics." What I will get is, we're not focusing on that. We want to kind of, broaden our approach a bit more, and those aren't inherently bad directions, right? World Darkness actually is a great example. Certainly, there are plenty of times where a lot of our more marginalized creators want to address past concerns, and certainly the World of Darkness has 30 years of history behind it, and there's been a lot of mistakes along the way. So there's a good reason to want to address those concerns. But also, we need to make sure that the game doesn't become just about marginalized people, right? That's a different game. So there have been times, like, for example, art notes for here's different character types. We occasionally get art notes where it's like, every character is marginalized and queer. And it's like, no, we do need to see other people in that space. Other people of more conservative backgrounds, or just, people who don't look in those same directions, just because it's meant to be a world that includes lots of different kinds of people. So yes, definitely include more people, but it's not just about that. There are other products where during the course of production, the world changes. The best one I can think of is Trinity Continuum Anima, which was our cyberpunk game. We started talking about it and pitching it in 2019. And then during the course of writing it in 2020, suddenly our game about a brand new city where everyone was forced to stay inside and play video games had a completely different resonance. And we had to adapt on the fly to realize that that happened. And even more frustratingly, at the time we were also doing a Chronicle Darkness crossover game, and the entire conceit of it was there's this magical disease that is damaging the world, and that book came out, right when this was starting. So it's we can't change it. It's fundamental to the design of the book. We can't change course. We've got to stay with this. So Contagion Chronicle kind of landed badly because it was the wrong time,
Wrong time, yeah. Well, I'm starting to feel that pinch right now for my werewolf game. So I have my notes, and I had this horrid revelation, I think, Sunday? Or no, not Sunday. I'm all mixed up. I think Thursday, where Musk is, going to the Pentagon to maybe talk about war plans with China. Mm-hmm. And I went, oh no. And so I spoiled something for two of my players. I got my camera. I brought up my Werewolf the Apocalypse notes back in December when I first came up with the idea. And I'm like, and I scroll down and it goes, the U.S. will declare war with China on this date. And I'm like, oh no. Oh no. Right. Or I released an episode like the week of, but was recorded the week before the huge stock market crash, where one character is scrolling the news and is like, U.S. has lost $7 trillion. And And I'm like, I promise I'm not trying to be this topical. I promise. Right. It's just happening.
But that goes all the way back to the beginning, because I do have to get going real quick. But I gave the Alan Moore quote of like, your first thing you do as a writer is to understands your moral and ideological backgrounds. He then follows up by saying, understand that it's going to change from under you and adapt to that, because he then explains that some of the things he put into his work in the early 80s, he would never do now. He's learned a lot, the world has changed, and so he can't write like he did in the 80s. And I think, again, that's good advice, is like, absolutely, if you are an artist, you have a political backstory, you have a political background, but you can't keep it fixed. The world is changing too fast, things are changing too fast, your art is going to come out at the wrong time, or deeply at the right time, and it's going to change how you intended to land, it's going to just look different, it's going to feel different, and that's just how it is. And we need to constantly move forward, we need to constantly reassess, consume more arts, look at how we make our arts, adjust, adapt. That doesn't mean go, oh, I think fascism's great. No, obviously, if you have strong beliefs, keep them. But how fascism impacts people and what that does to the world is going to change. How people want to engage with it is going to change. What was Indiana Jones and Last Crusade, or not Last Crusade, Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, punching Nazis was cliche when it first came out, and it's like, this is kind of and it was criticized for like, that's an obvious villain, and it feels a bit weak. And now it's like, yeah, punch Nazis. That's like one of the biggest memes you get. So like, that aged well. Other things were going to age badly. You just need to keep moving forward. Just keep making more art. Keep honest with yourself. Keep honest with your friends. Keep putting out things that you can stand behind. That's all I can do.
Agreed. No, the punch Nazis ones is kind of interesting, because I'm starting to run into this with some family friends where they're very anti-Trump, but they keep playing up the buffoonery of him, and it's like, look, you can be a buffoon and dangerous, and we need to stop focusing on the buffoonery, because right now it's dangerous. Like, I need some energy there, like kind of thing. But I also think, like, it is interesting, because I do think the punch Nazi thing in Werewolf 5th actually lands not great, personally. And I try and keep my Werewolf 5th stuff to a minimum, because it's just, there's a whole like 4-hour video on how I didn't like it and why.
It is not for you.
It is not for me. It is not for me. I think, like, even if I took out all the stuff that happened behind the scenes with James and the other creators, it's not for me. But it is interesting, because it has a whole thing about it. It feels disingenuous, I guess. I think that's right. I think that's where, like, I can mess with some political art that I don't agree with. Like, I won't buy it, obviously, for several reasons, but Lamentations of the Flame Princess, great game, is very strongly conservative too in many ways, and you can feel that, but you can get behind the writing, because it comes from almost a genuine place, versus like it feeling disingenuous, it feeling like it's putting on pageantry to kind of just widen a market. If that makes sense. I think it
absolutely does.
That's a trick of things. I think that's why, I actually think that's maybe why, I haven't read too much of it beyond, I know that the DMG for the newest edition of D&D is quite good. But there are certain choices, like orcs no longer being evil and they're being in the player's handbook and things like that, and people like it enough, but because of how Hasbro and Wizards have been treating the property versus what has ended up on the page, even if the authors are very genuine in everything they believe in that book, because of that disconnect between the corporate culture and what the book is saying, it creates this disingenuous, like, feel, and that's why it seems like people are, just from people I talk to at least, I know that's not everyone in the gaming space by any stretch of the imagination, is they're sticking with the 2014 edition of fifth edition rather than jumping to the new one, despite all the quality of life changes.
Right, and then that's the other thing. But is really quick. Anything made, any media, any art made by a company that is designed to make money is always going to go where the money is. There was a point where a lot of companies really felt that like marketing specifically towards people who embraced diversity, who thought trans people had a right to exist, who thought queer people had a right to exist, that was very strong. And so a lot of media went to that. Right now, that has shifted pretty heavily. And so a lot of media is going to shift along with it. It's frustrating, it's irritating, it's galling, but it's just the companies don't care about you, right? So Hasbro doesn't care about you. Hasbro cares about you buying a new thing. So if people really believe and put it into the page, that's great. But at some level, someone in the company is going to go, yeah, no, just cut this. I've seen it happen. I've seen stuff where it's like, yeah, we're just going to cut this. We don't want to engage with it. I've had people give me direct things like, hey, we want to ease back on this kind of narrative. Anyway, been a lovely chat. I do have to get going.
Oh, yes. No, absolutely.
Great talking about this stuff.
No, thank you so much for joining. Do you have any closing thoughts before you leave? And if you want to be found, where can folks find you?
Depends on what they want to ask me, honestly. But no, if you want to find my work, you can find me at pugsteady.com. And if you do like somewhat comedic, very inclusive fantasy games, may I recommend Realms of Pugmire, realmsofpugmire.com. That is a silly dog game about dogs in the post-apocalypse who are trying to figure out what the hell's going on, because honestly, aren't we all trying to figure out what the hell's going on?
Agreed. Well, I've been Keegan. This is A Bunch of Gamers. You can find me on YouTube, Podbean. I'm now on Blue Sky. God help me. And I've never been on Twitter. I founded a cesspool, and I was proven right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye.